One of the questions that I get asked most often by my coaching clients is, Brad, is there any hope for my marriage? Is it even worth trying to fix things with my spouse, or should I give up? And that is exactly what I'll be covering in this video, so keep watching to find out whether or not your marriage is still worth saving. Before I begin, welcome to my new channel. Welcome guys, I am Brad Browning, aka The Marriage Guy. And for over 10 years, I've been a leading marriage and divorce coach, and I'm the best-selling author of Mend the Marriage, a comprehensive guide to preventing divorce and rescuing a marriage on the brink of collapse. For my help fixing your situation, regardless of the current situation you're facing, just go to marriageguy.com/coaching. Now, the question at hand today is, how do I know if my marriage is worth saving? And before I begin to tell you what to look for and how to evaluate your own relationship and its potential future, let me quickly clarify one thing. Not all marriages are worth saving. Sometimes, and this is not particularly common, but it definitely is the reality for some couples, things are just so bad, so toxic, that there's simply no reason to keep trying. If you're in this kind of situation, you'll probably know it already, but towards the end of this video, I'll cover two things that should be a sign that it's time to give up and move on. First, though, I want to ask you some questions to help you evaluate your situation and your prospects for repairing things with your spouse. Consider writing these questions down as I cover them, and then take the time to answer each of them for yourself. This is going to help you make a list of the pros and cons of whatever decision you make down the road, and will help you keep track of the things that you may need to work on if you decide your marriage is worth saving. So question number one is, what is your negative to positive interaction ratio? So I want to start with a big one, and that is the positive to negative interaction ratio. So let me explain what I mean by that. You and your spouse constantly interact with one another throughout your daily life. So whether it's having breakfast together, meeting for lunch, taking the family out for dinner, or going out of town for a weekend away, anytime you spend time with your spouse, it's going to consist of interactions with one another. And these interactions can either be positive, neutral, or negative. So let's forget about the neutral interactions with your spouse for now. Anything that doesn't make one or both of you smile, laugh, feel happy, feel angry, or sad, those are interactions that don't have an impact on the health of your relationship. It's the positive and negative interactions that we want to focus on here. So a positive interaction could be things like a kiss, a shared laugh, a nice dinner out, or a good conversation with your spouse. Anything that makes one or both of you happy or feel good is a positive interaction. On the other hand, negative interactions are things like arguing, bickering, accusations, jealousy, or insults. Even simply getting the cold shoulder from your partner or trying to talk to them about something important to you and being brushed off could be considered negative interactions. So over the next week, quietly start tracking the positive and negative interactions that you have with your partner throughout the course of your daily life. So if something positive happens between you two, a joke, a hug, a compliment, tally that in the positive interaction column. On the flip side, in a separate column, tally up the unpleasant experiences and negative interactions with your spouse. And once you have a decent sample size written down, compare the two columns and how many check marks are in each. And this will give you what I call the positive to negative interaction ratio with your spouse. Now, there's really no set rule as to what you should aim for. Some couples can have a happy marriage with a low ratio of positive to negative interactions, while others will need a higher number of positives for every negative in order to sustain a happy relationship. As a general rule, I typically suggest my clients aim for 5 positive interactions for every 1 negative. And this 5-to-1 ratio tends to be a decent benchmark to gauge the health of a relationship and the quality of time that you share together. Now, don't read too much into this exercise, especially since some positives and negatives can be a lot more impactful than others, but it definitely is a worthwhile exercise to try out. You might find that you end up with more negatives than positives after a week or two of counting, which is a bad sign. But on the other hand, maybe you'll realize that you actually do have a lot of good times with your spouse, and those outweigh the negatives. Either way, try this out for a week or so, ideally without your spouse knowing about it, and see what you learn from it. And question number 2, are you still comfortable with your spouse? So numerous studies have shown that the top 2 reasons why happily married couples stay together are kindness and generosity. Now, these traits are important when creating a comfortable environment for you and your spouse. Nobody wants to be constantly stressed, angry, frustrated, or on edge all the time when they're around their spouse. These sorts of characteristics are often the leading indicators of why marriages fall apart. So consider how you feel when you and your spouse are together in the same room. Do you feel like you're walking on eggshells all the time? Are you scared of interacting with your spouse for fear that he or she will lash out at you? Or maybe do you fear that you'll lash out at your spouse? If you aren't comfortable with your spouse anymore, and it's been a while since you've felt that sort of comfort, then it may be a strong indicator that you and your spouse aren't meant to be. And on to question number 3, do you and your spouse still have chemistry? Now, it's perfectly normal for chemistry to wane over time. It's not realistic to assume that your sex life and your intimate connection will be just as strong and passionate after 20 years of marriage than it was on your honeymoon. There's no specific rule as to how much sex and intimacy you should be having with your spouse. For some couples, spending time in the bedroom is a daily occurrence. For others, once or twice a month is enough to keep the spark alive and to satisfy both partners. Basically, there's no magic number when it comes to how much sex you and your partner should be having, since every marriage is different. But you do need to be honest with yourself and ask whether you're happy with the level of intimacy that your marriage is bringing you. Do you wish that you and your spouse had more physical chemistry and a better connection? Do you wish you kissed each other more often? Do you want sex far more often than your spouse does, or vice versa? Again, these questions are difficult to answer if your marriage is on the rocks, but if you and your partner are constantly on different levels when it comes to your sex life and it's driving a wedge in your relationship, then you have to consider whether this is a problem that's going to plague your marriage for years to come or whether it's actually fixable. Question number 4, are you and your spouse still friends? Now, a married couple should be a team. I firmly believe that. So with all of my coaching clients, one of my main objectives is to help both spouses create a we mentality as opposed to a me mentality. And one of the best ways to cultivate this mentality is by building an extremely strong friendship. Now, building a strong marriage can be about romance, of course, but without the feelings of camaraderie and support, a marriage is doomed. And at the end of the day, you need to ask yourself if you're willing to support your spouse no matter what. So if they're having a bad day at work, do you try and cheer them up? And on the flip side, does he or she, provide you with the support when things aren't going your way? Do you still share laughs with your spouse? Do you still have fun from time to time? Now, I realize right now these sorts of questions can be difficult to answer, especially if your marriage is in crisis. But try and think about the last time you and your spouse shared a positive, friendly interaction with one another. As we discussed earlier in the video, if it's been months or years since you had any really meaningful positive interactions with your spouse, then chances are you're not really friends anymore, and getting out of that hole might be more trouble than it's worth. Question number 5 is, do you still have shared hobbies or pastimes with your spouse? So as time goes on, people change, right? And when two people change in a marriage, it can put a tremendous strain on the relationship. I find that many of my coaching clients are suffering from a slow divergence of interests in their marriage, leading both partners to slowly spend more and more time on their own. So for example, maybe your husband likes to play golf every weekend, whereas you prefer to spend time watching Netflix with your friends. Now, to some degree, this is actually very healthy, and you should always pursue your own passions and have hobbies outside your marriage. But when your interests start to become opposite, that you no longer, even want to spend time with one another, he wants to go hiking, you want to go to a music festival, and since you can't agree, you both end up doing your own thing, well, that's not a healthy thing for your relationship. Now, this by itself is usually a problem that can be solved, but in some cases, you may find your lifestyles drifting so far apart that it starts to become nearly impossible to agree on something to do together. And that's when things become more serious, and you need to consider whether you'll ever be able to find shared interests that can keep your friendship and your connection alive for the long haul. And question number 6, what did you score on my free marriage quiz? Now, I know this seems like a bit of shameless self-promotion here, but please do take 5 minutes after this video is over to complete my free quiz. The URL is marriageguy.com/quiz. And when you complete the quiz questions and click submit, your answers will be run through a scoring algorithm that will help evaluate your situation and the overall health of your marriage. Now, you'll be given a score, and then this indicates how difficult or feasible it will be to save your marriage, as well as a list of specific suggestions to maximize your odds of fixing things with your spouse and living happily ever after. Now, if you score below 60 on the quiz, then things are looking pretty grim, and you'll want to think about whether you really should invest more time and effort into saving the relationship. On the other hand, if your score is in the 60 to 70 range, you're in a tough situation, but you likely still have some hope to turn things around. If your score is between 70 and 80, then your marriage is obviously not in great shape, but it's likely not beyond saving. And if you score above 80, then you have nothing to worry about, and it's probably just a few minor changes that you need to make in order to ensure that your marriage stays healthy. Again, take the quiz right after this video is over at marriageguy.com/quiz. As I said, it's free and it takes only about 5 minutes. And last but not least, question number 7 is, have you tried marriage counseling or therapy already? Now, I wanted to include this final question because despite what it may seem from my other YouTube videos, I really do believe that traditional couples counseling can be helpful in many situations. Now, not all couples can afford it, or maybe your husband or wife is unwilling to even try seeing a counselor with you. But if it's something that they're still open to trying, then it definitely might be worth exploring. If you can't afford multiple sessions with a certified counselor or therapist in your local area, or your spouse isn't willing to go with you, then you may want to learn about my ongoing email coaching service. Now, unlike a counseling session, it's affordable and it'll give you ongoing support and guidance as your situation unfolds and as you work things out with your spouse. To learn more about working with me one-on-one, just go to marriageguy.com/coaching. That being said, if you haven't tried counseling yet and your partner is willing and you can afford a few sessions, then I do recommend that option too, as it can be very helpful for some couples. Look for a certified counselor or therapist with good credentials and good reviews online, and go in with an open mind. If you've already tried counseling multiple times and it's never made any real progress on your marriage, or maybe you've even found that the therapy made things worse between you and your spouse, well, that's not a good sign. Things may yet be salvageable for your marriage, but failing to see any improvement after giving counseling a fair shot can be an indication that it's time to start thinking about whether divorce might be the right path forward. Now, those 7 questions, which I hope you answered for yourself here as I covered them along in this video, should help you get a better sense of whether your marriage has any chance of surviving. The more negative and concerning your answers to these questions, the more likely it is that your marriage is on the verge of collapse. But on the other hand, maybe your answers will help you realize, that things aren't so bad after all. I still recommend taking action to further improve the health of your marriage, even if you end up feeling more positive and hopeful after answering these 7 questions for yourself. Remember, a marriage crisis won't resolve itself, no matter how minor it might seem, but for many of you, the solution may not be that difficult or far-fetched. And finally, guys, before I end this video, I mentioned in the beginning that there are a few certain scenarios where trying to rescue your marriage may not be a wise choice. So the following 2 points that I'll cover in a moment might sound like common sense, but I promise you it's not always so obvious to many people in your situation. Now, the first scenario where divorce might be necessary is when any kind of physical abuse is involved. If your partner is physically violent or abusive in any way, especially if it's happened more than once, you need to immediately take action. Any kind of domestic partner abuse is serious and extremely troublesome, and you just can't accept that in your relationship. So if your partner has ever been physically violent towards you, get help from your friends and family, from police, or from your doctor. I recently partnered with a certified counselor to create a free online guide to dealing with abuse in a relationship, which I'm going to put a link to in the description below. And that guide will help you figure out how to safely escape an abusive relationship, and it includes a number of additional resources where you can get further help. Now, the second situation where divorce is probably your best option is when dealing with a spouse who is a serial cheater. Now, look, I'm extremely hesitant to tell anyone, including my coaching clients, to end a relationship. I really believe the only person who can make that decision is you, and my job as a marriage coach is to guide you and help you come to a decision that's right for you. But if you're one of those unlucky folks that's married to someone who's constantly unfaithful, if they've cheated on you, multiple times, even after promising never to do so again, then you probably need to face the facts and accept this is going to continue happening as long as you're married to this person. Now, many people can change their ways and stick to promises never to cheat on you again, but others are simply never going to change, meaning you'll have to deal with the heartbreak of finding out your spouse is cheating on you again in the future. And do you really want to have that kind of marriage? You're worth more than that, and you have every right to a monogamous relationship if that's what you want. So if your partner's cheating has been an ongoing issue for some time, realize that it's likely not ever going to stop, and divorce might be the best thing for you in the long run. Now, I hope that most of you won't be facing either of those situations. In fact, I'm sure that many of you are actually now feeling more hopeful about saving your marriage based on what you've learned in this video. But if you are in a marriage that involves abuse or serial cheating, leaving your spouse might be the only long-term solution. Don't forget to take my free quiz at marriageguy.com/quiz to find out the odds that you'll be able to fix your marriage and live happily ever after with your spouse. It's free. It just takes 5 minutes. So again, go click the like and subscribe buttons and then go and take that quiz at marriageguy.com/quiz. Thank you for watching, beautiful people. I will talk to you again in my next video.